I'm Fritz Steiner, and I have the great pleasure of serving as the Dean and the Paley Professor of the University of Pennsylvania Stuart Weitzman School. And I'm very proud to announce that yesterday at Weitzman's 2024 Commencement Ceremony, the school officially awarded Lin Huiyin a long overdue posthumous Bachelor of Architecture degree. The diversity and experiences and perspective among our students, faculty, and staff is one of our greatest strengths. So too is our long history of cultural exchange with China. So today we're here to tell more of Lin's story and to celebrate that milestone. Many of you are admirers of Lin and her incredible legacy, and we are proud to be joined by many members of the Lin family, as well as distinguished scholars from China. Please join me in welcoming them to Penn. Could our guests please stand? I realize that that's a kind of odd request because half of the audience is standing, and probably most of the rest of you are guests also. So thank you all for being here. Before I turn the conversation today over to Zhongjie Lin, the Benjamin Z. Lin Presidential Associate Professor of City and Regional Planning, who will lead our panel discussion, I would like to share this video and how we got to this point in Penn's history.
In 1927, Lin Huiyin graduated from Penn with a fine arts degree. But Lin was an architect in training and in practice. Her influence on architectural preservation and design in China was tremendous, and Penn has long been proud to count Lin among our alumni. Lin earned her degree in architecture many years ago. Because of bias, she was not able to receive it. Now, we correct that mistake and grant her the credentials she deserved.
So in the 1920s, Philadelphia is one of the most prosperous cities in America. It is the workshop of the world. Our population at that time was growing. So it's an incredibly exciting place, and we were known as a place of innovation. And in terms of architecture, the 1920s is an exciting period because we're seeing the build out of one of the most remarkable pieces of City Beautiful architecture in America, the Benjamin Franklin Parkway, the Free Library, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Rodin Museum. Important institutional buildings here in the city of Philadelphia are literally rising out of the ground when Lin Huiyin is arriving in the city in the fall of 1924. Must have been very exciting for young architects to see what it is that architects could do and the scale at which they could do it.
Personally, I am impressed with her beyond architecture. She's known to the general public in China as someone who encompasses like this vision of interdisciplinary study of architecture before people even use the word interdisciplinary. You know, from design to architecture, to graphics, to urban studies, and then to poetry and literature. A really significant architect is someone who can bring kind of their insight in architecture into life and I think popular culture as well.
Lin Huiyin was somebody who came into the field of architecture in the 1920s when the pathways for women to enter the profession were still very narrow. There were places where you could go to school and you could get a degree, and from there you still had the question of who's going to hire you. There were all sorts of impediments to practice, and yet she came in and she did everything she could before she arrived here, when she was here, to study everything, every class that her male counterparts did towards getting an architecture degree. She was held back from doing so with some technical, you couldn't take this class, you couldn't take that class.
Lin took all the same courses except for two that the other architecture students took. She really clearly wanted to be an architect. The two courses that she couldn't take, one was figure drawing because she had to draw naked men, and the second was a construction course, and women weren't allowed in job sites. Well, she and the other classmates went back to China, and they were called the first generation of modern Chinese architects. So she had an immense impact on modern Chinese architecture in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. With her husband, also had an influence on two of the major schools of architecture in China.
It's very difficult to separate Lin Huiyin from her husband, Liang Sushen. Two people who fit incredibly well together creatively. They complemented each other in their skills. They were also a husband and wife, so there's a love story there. Immigration records into the United States in 1924, you see them traveling on the same ship. They're in the list of the passenger manifest right next to each other. They're a couple that made a life together. And after studying here and spending a bit more time in the United States and traveling back to China, they dove into the systematic study of classical Chinese architecture. And that really had not been done before. They saw it as essential to the future of Chinese architecture to look at its past, to use it as a basis for creativity moving forward, recognize that there could be aspects of modernity in understanding the traditional forms.
Liang and Lin were in the first generation in China to break away from the feudal system and the Confucius ideology. So they were intellectuals. They pursue freedom, they pursue academic liberality. Their relationship are beyond traditional husband and wife. They're also partners in their work. They travel far into the hinterland in China together to discover the historic wooden structures. So their relationship really reinforced their collaboration and their contribution to architecture.
I think Lin's work is most significant in historic preservation. She and her partner Liang, they were really the first modern architect in China who started giving importance to the historic buildings. It's less about kind of, formulating a new ideology in architecture, but what they did is sort of the beginning of architecture as a discipline, as a practice, to have the general public as well take kind of interest in the history of architecture from China.
The story of Lin and her husband Liang was an excellent example of this East-West dialogue. So they were trained in this Beaux-Arts system at Penn, but they went back to China and used their training of architecture, Western architecture, to rediscover and to study Chinese wooden architecture and integrating the traditional aesthetic and value of China.
So as part of the process of really asking ourselves the question, what was Lin Huiyin's accomplishment as a student here? We went back to the primary sources that we have, and there are documents like the student transcripts, not just for her, but for her classmates, lists and descriptions of the courses, the requirements. There are faculty meeting minutes where they discuss the process about how they might go about admitting women into the program and what restrictions might be in place. So the things that surprised me about looking that closely and that intensively is how much she did.
Several friends of mine told me they went to architectural school because of Lin, because they admire Lin's artistic accomplishments. Because in China, architecture is considered an engineering major, predominantly male students. 30 years ago, when I was an architectural student, but this landscape has changed dramatically because of female architects like Lin Huiyin and many others.
I think this brings to light that there was a time when women could not get an architecture degree. It's like going back to history and reversing some kind of injustice.
To me, Lin Huiyin is an inspiration. She's one of those figures that you come across in the work that you do every day. And so for me to have a small role in helping build support amongst the community here at Penn to say, hey, this is someone who really needs to be recognized as someone who, in her lifetime, in that moment when she was here stepping out in a cap and gown, she should have been someone getting a Bachelor's of Architecture. It's incredibly satisfying to have been part of an effort to make that happen.
To the Chinese students and alumni who are here, I think it recognizes their culture. You know, still in the Western world, most of our study of architecture history and theory is still based on kind of this, you know, Eurocentric lens. And so providing a different perspective from China and through kind of her research and her scholarship, I think it recognizes that, you know, there's importance in Chinese architecture history.
I think for the Lin family, it's a celebration and a bit of closure. I think it's significant that on her tombstone, it's her name and then architect. Just recognizing who she was is really, I think, important for the Lin family, but I think architecture more broadly. For us here at Penn, it's an opportunity to correct a mistake we made.
The education she received at Penn allowed her to master Western principles and use them in the service of thousands of years of Chinese history. Her architectural skill made an enormous difference in China, and Penn is so proud of the bridge she built between our nations. It is our privilege to award Lin Huiyin her Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Pennsylvania Stuart Weitzman School of Design.
So, 1924, I got another one. 1924 to 2024. That wasn't an accident. We were aware of that 100-year difference and thought that that was the right time to do this. On this occasion, we're so delighted to welcome Lin Huiyin's family to recognize this long overdue degree. And I'd like to turn the stage over to Yu Kui, Lin Huiyin's granddaughter.
Dear Dean Steiner and faculty, graduates, alumni, and friends, good morning. My name is Yu Kui. As Lin Huiyin's granddaughter, I'm very pleased and honored to have this opportunity to speak to you on this momentous occasion. I do so on behalf of many people from our extended family who would like to or should be here. Or should be here, but unable to, including my mother Liang Zaibing, Lin Huiyin and Liang Sicheng's daughter. We are moved by the solemn mood of this ceremony and grateful to many people who have worked so hard over many months to make this day a reality, and proud of Lin Huiyin's immeasurable achievements that we are gathering here to remember and to celebrate. Early this year, Dean Steiner and other teachers from Penn traveled to Beijing to meet with our family. We are briefed on the meticulous and rigorous review process that led to the decision award the Bachelor of Architecture degree in faculty to Lin. We salute to the Weitzman School of Design for setting this right precedent and also doing that unprecedented. What Lin had ever done before, as well as today, what the school has done for her. We just feel the same academic spirit, persistence, and the pursuit of truth. It brings us tremendous excitement to note that we are awarding this posthumous diploma to Lin Huiyin on the 100th anniversary of her enrollment at the school and the 120th anniversary of her birth. Many, and myself too, had long thought that prior to Lin's arrival at school, my grandma had not known that women were not allowed to pursue a degree in architecture here, and that she was shocked when she found out. But the truth, as I now know, is quite different. She had been fully aware, but was simply undeterred. What gave her such courage? Here, I had many things like to share with you, but not just focus on 3 facts about her career and at Penn that had left a particular deep impression on me, that speak volume of kind of woman she was. First, there was her nature and upbringing. Lin appeared slender frame and somehow fragile-like, but she actually had a strong and yielding and persistent character inside. As the daughter of father with a cosmopolitan spirit and a vision and a great expectation for his favorite daughter. When Lin, at the age of 16, traveled around Europe with her father and was mesmerized by the gorgeous structure she saw. Once she made up her mind at the age of 17 that she would work as an architect. There was no stopping her, but her choice and pursuits not only led to her admission rejection, but also challenging her lifelong. She had to overcome enormous obstacles. At that time, in China, architecture was only seen as craft or labor, and China's tradition scholars disdained to associate with craftsmen. That and the field had nothing to do with women at all. But Lin Huiyin wanted to bring back a new knowledge and displaying for her country and become a new generation of film architects. Second, and being here at campus, I feel similar. I feel familiar and warm. To think about Lin came to UPenn anyway for 2 reasons. She knew Penn was the best for 2 reasons, and she knew Penn was the best, and Liang Sicheng, who would wedding in few years and work together with for the rest of her life, was enrolled here. So many of you may know that Lin Huiyin and Liang Sicheng, this couple together called Liang and Lin, as if they were one. That because they were very different in many ways and complemented to each other, and they argued and disagreed with each other, and often during their time at Penn. That was how they learned to work together as a team, as well as doing together as a family. So such that their love and a perfect match cooperation career actually start from here. Third, Lin Huiyin seemed to be very busy and successful at her last year in school. But we know that That's actually her most difficult time. Toward end of 1925, when her beloved father died suddenly, Lin was devastated. Since the two has been especially close, but just as disastrously, she was left in dire financial crisis. In fact, she came perilously, almost drawing out. So fortunately, and in addition to help from her future husband's family, Lin was able to secure a job as assistant and drawing instructor at Department of Architecture. Something would not have been possible had she not performed exceptionally well academically. Lin Huiyin's daughter, Liang Zaibing, once said, I really don't know how my mother, a young lady who had extremely delicate emotions at that time, managed to survive with such perseverance. Neither bereavement nor financial hardship diminished her resolve to get best training what she wanted to be, namely an architect. Lin Huiyin's steely determination would stand her in good stead throughout the rest of her life. She will continue to inspire women everywhere to believe in themselves, never give up. Finally, once again, I want to say that Lin was proven through her life that she was a true architect. Her tremendous contribution to a historically male-dominant field had earned her respect and admiration from her alma mater and peers, students, friends, and family. Yesterday, Lin Huiyin finally received her long-overdue posthumous Bachelor of Architecture degree that I believe, if my grandma Lin Huiyin know that, her charming smile will be as bright as moonlight and as sweet as blooming flower, just like what she said in her beautiful poem. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kui. Thank you, Dean Steiner. I'm Lin Zhongjie, Associate Professor of City and Regional Planning at the Weitzman School of Design. It's my great honor to be part of this event. On January 28, 2022, I stood with Dean Steiner in front of a 20-foot board documenting 23 graduates of Penn architecture in the 1920s through 1940s. And I heard him say, we need to give the architectural degree back to this woman. Over the past year and a half, I have observed how he advocated for this idea to the university, navigating through this complex task with our dedicated team in the school, communicating tirelessly to various audiences. The whole process has been very inspiring to me. So I want to express my gratitude to Fritz leadership and for this once-in-a-lifetime experience. And I know many people are thinking the same. We also want to extend our gratitude to the Lin family for their tremendous support an invaluable partnership on this journey. Standing here today, I feel both proud and humble, surrounded by the enduring legacy of Lin Huiyin. As an architect and scholar trained both in China and at Penn myself, I have been profoundly influenced by Lin and her generation. When I joined Penn in the early 2000s, seeing the work by these pioneering architects firsthand struck me with the strong and lasting cultural tie between this institution and the design education and practice in China. The impressive turnout today is another testament of these connections and a powerful motivator for us to further this endeavor. So thanks to everyone. Our program today features 3 consecutive panels. First, a faculty panel, then a guest panel. The faculty panel comprises 3 esteemed colleagues from Penn. These historians or practitioners will share the insights into Lin's legacies from historical, pedagogical, and professional perspectives. I will introduce them all 3 speakers at once, so we will proceed seamlessly through their presentations. The first speaker is Dr. Nancy Steinhardt, Professor of East Asian Art and Curator of Chinese Art of Penn Museum. She is a leading expert on Chinese architecture, with numerous books published on the evolution of architecture and urbanism in China. Her 2019 volume, Chinese Architecture, A History, is a definitive account on this subject and won the prestigious Alice David Hitchcock Book Award. Nancy is an amazing storyteller among historians. And for example, the last chapter of this book is titled, quote, China comes to Europe, Europe comes to China, Chinese students come to the United States, end quote, depicting the significant intercultural venture during Lin's era. The second speaker, Bill Whitaker, served as the curator and collection manager of the Architectural Archive at Penn. An expert of great architects of the 20th century, he has curated numerous exhibitions, many of which have traveled globally. I consider him a living encyclopedia of modern architecture with profound knowledge and insights. Those seeking information on Lin and Liang and their impacts at the archive would have been impressed by his expertise. We will conclude our faculty panel with Rossana Hu, Miller Professor, Chair of Architecture, and co-founder of Neri and Hu, based in Shanghai. Her practice transcends disciplinary and cultural boundaries to pursue a timeless quality in contemporary design. A fluent bilingual, Rossana seamlessly blends Eastern and Western culture as she navigates between academia and practice. In many ways, her career path embodies the legacy of innovation and cross-cultural exchange pioneered by Lin Huiyin a century ago. So please join me to welcome our first speaker, Nancy.
Thank you. It is my great pleasure to be here, to see so many friends and colleagues that I've known and that Penn has known for decades. Anyone who knows anything about Chinese architecture feels the presence of Lin Huiyin and Liang Sicheng the first time they walk on the campus of the University of Pennsylvania. Some of you are visiting Penn today for the first time, and you probably have that feeling. The building in which they studied architecture does not stand, but buildings in which they stood did, and one is Furness Building, built by Frank Furness, 1888 to 1891. We are in a renovated upstairs part of that building today, and they also stood in the Penn Museum. I'm using the pronoun they. It is a fact that Liang and Lin, his name always first, are almost always said in the same breath. While Liang seems to get more credit for his achievements in design, preservation, field work, as an educator, and as a textual scholar, is a reasonable question. Perhaps because he lived longer. But as many of you know, that longer life meant that he had to reconcile with his Western education, which Lin also had, and his designs and his assumed political views in the 1950s and 1960s. Lifespan and politics aside, my impression is that even though Liang had a formal degree in architecture, his wife was his equal partner in their professional life. One example comes to mind. In one of the seminal publications of the Society for Research in Chinese Architecture, the study of architecture along the Fun River in southern Shanxi province, Lin is first author. Liang did collaborate. He collaborated with Liu Duanzhen. He collaborated with Chen Zhenxiang on the design for a new plan for Beijing. And he's always first author, but not when he published with his wife. Scholarly impressions, of course, are only worth so much, and I, of course, did not know Liang or Lin. In honoring Lin Huiyin today, I want to share reminiscences from someone who knew both of them well and whom I also knew. Her name was Wilma Fairbank. By Wilma's own admission, she knew Lin Huiyin, whom she called Phyllis, better than anyone except, she said, probably her husband. Wilma writes that Lin Huiyin was the closest female friend she ever had. A little bit about Wilma Cannon Fairbank. She was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1909, so she was 5 years older 5 years younger than Lin Huiyin. Wilma was the daughter of a well-known doctor. She would live in Cambridge, Mass. Her entire life, except when she lived in China. In 1931, Wilma graduated from Radcliffe with a degree in art history and went to China as a cultural attaché at the US Embassy. There she met and married John K. Fairbank, the molder and shaper of the study of modern China and US positions about China in the 1950s, 1960s, and 1970s. Wilma met and traveled with archaeologists and architects through her career in China. In the summer of 1932, 2 months after their wedding, the Fairbanks met Liang and Lin somewhere in Beijing. They met through mutual friends. I don't know who those friends were. John writes, our closest friends in China, or elsewhere for that matter, were Liang Sicheng and Lin Huiyin, two people who combined the Chinese and the Anglo-Saxon cultural traditions. Wilma writes, perhaps on the same day, neither they nor we were aware that years of close friendship lay ahead, but we were captivated from the first. This was a time when people wrote letters, when people kept diaries, and when people kept copies of their letters. In a letter to Wilma Fairbank, Lin Huiyin wrote, I did not know once that I could have a friend in a woman. It is my luck to have met you, because otherwise I may never have known or enjoyed this warm feeling, this warm flow of feeling. And in a letter from China, John Fairbank wrote, leaving friends like Liang and Lin was traumatic. We had learned from each other and given each other all we could. Phyllis, as they called her, had become the closest friend to both of us. Our departure was true heartbreak. The Fairbanks met China's intelligentsia through Liang and Lin, and the architects met American, British, and French historians and diplomats through the Fairbanks. Two students of John K. Fairbank write in his obituary that through Wilma, John saw how China worked, how China made things, and about life in villages. But this was actually through Lin Huiyin. The student writes that through Wilma, so the student writes, some of the field trips into the countryside were with Lin and Liang. Probably many of you know that Liang Sicheng entrusted a manuscript to Wilma Fairbank that only 30 years after that was published. Fast forward to the 1970s, probably to the 1950s, perhaps earlier, but 1970s is where I can begin my story. In 1936, the Fairbanks bought a house at 41 Winthrop Street. It would be their address until both of their deaths, he in 1991, she in 2002. Every Thursday from 4 to 6 p.m., the Fairbanks opened their house to sinologists, Japanologists, and East Asian historians in the greater Cambridge area. They were both modest and casual. They served tea, punch, and small sandwiches. The menu did not exchange from the first time I was there in 1974 until my last visit, which probably was in the late 1990s. Wilma always wore black pants and a loose-fitting blouse, the dress of a Chinese woman. She wore this kind of outfit even to museum openings and to award ceremonies. John K., as people called him, wore a suit. Wilma audited seminars on Chinese art from the beginning of her residence in Cambridge until her death. And in my first seminar in the fall of 1974, she stood up at the end of this class. She turned around and looked at the students and said, "We have tea on Thursdays at 4. Why don't you come?" And we all did. And that was where I met more Boston area faculty in Chinese studies than at any conference that I have ever attended. John K. always had at least one diplomat and former students. They knew to gravitate to a small sofa and a group of chairs arranged in a circle at one side of the room, and they discussed something that John wanted to talk about that week. Usually it was a political issue in China. The art historian we stood around Wilma, and it was at one of these teas that I first heard her talk about Lin Huiyin. I learned in the 1970s, when it was not popular to talk about Liang and Lin in China, that Phyllis was the daughter of a diplomat who had spent time in Paris. And I learned that she had come to Penn in 1924, not knowing until she arrived that she would have to be in the fine arts department, something that finally has been corrected this weekend. She and Liang both graduated the same year, 1927, and after that, they both worked in Paul Cray's office. I heard at one of those teas about their wedding in Ottawa. I heard about the early years of the Society for Research in Chinese Architecture, and one comment has reverberated with me ever since. Wilma said, Hui, sometimes she also called her Hui, Hui traveled when she had someone to leave their young children with. Finding childcare for a working mother was not easy in China in the 1930s. Wilma did not have children until much later in her life. They were several years older. So Wilma continues, now I'm quoting from Wilma about the summer of 1932. They were several years older than we, but their students were in America, but their student years in America were not very far in the past. Perhaps that prompted our immediate liking for each other. They were neighbors as well as friends, and we shared interests in Chinese art and Chinese history. For whatever reason, we became intimate in the next 4 years. In the summer of 1934, Liang and Lin joined the Fairbanks at a residence owned by the anthropologist Arthur Hummel at a mill in Zhongjie province. The Fairbanks accompanied Liang and Lin from here southward, and they, in fact, were on that field trip to southern Shanxi. Wilma writes, "We shared with them the primitive travel conditions, the excitement or disappointment at the end of promising side trips to look at buildings described in gazetteers, and the interesting task of making measurements." And it must have been interesting in 1932. John, during the same period, writes, "Our friendship continued through correspondence after we returned to America in 1936, and it deepened when we returned to China in government service during World War II. At that time as well, they were in the far west of China while the Japanese occupied Beijing and the entire East Coast." A visit to Liang and Lin, I'm still quoting John Fairbank, "A visit to Liang and Lin and Li Jiang was a revelation to us of the poverty and misery induced by war. Liang by that time was nurse and cook as well as research director. In other words, Lin's tuberculosis was already intense in the early 1940s. Liang saw the Fairbanks for the last time when he visited the US in 1947. No doubt on a Thursday, he was at one of those teas. They last saw Lin Huiyin in 1936. Just a few more quotes about Phyllis Lin from John K. Fairbank. He writes, "Both slight of build, they had taken on the patriotic task of rediscovering the national monuments of Chinese architecture by scientific fieldwork. Any contact with such friends was a delight. We could be windows for each other. Our gossip analyzed the numerous idiosyncrasies of mutual acquaintances among the local faculty at Beida, Tsinghua, and Yanjing." At that time, there was still Yanjing University. "They knew everything about everyone." This is John writing. "They could recite Chinese poetry the way it should be recited, with a strong but shifting beat, and they could contrast it with Keats, Tennyson, or Vachel Lindsay. They knew their Song painters and calligraphers, and of course, all the landmarks of Peking. Through their eyes, we began to sense the Chinese problem of cultural integration, the necessity to winnow the past and discriminate among things foreign, what to preserve and what to borrow. It was a kind of double cultural frontier that few human beings have been on so pervasively and so consciously. It took intelligence, courage, and stamina to live in two cultures." And I think it's important to recognize the impact of Lin and Liang on John, who, of course, as I've said, I think everybody in this room knows who he was. They had a powerful impact on all of his writing. 2 days ago, I was standing in the new architecture museum in the city of Taiyuan. In fact, new, as I walked in, they were putting the last label under a picture. There are countless pictures of Lin Huiyin and of the contributions of Lin and Liang to the study of Chinese architecture. From the vantage point of a researcher, Lin Huiyin exemplified intelligence, courage, and stamina every day of her adult life. From 1924 to 1927, the faculty and students at the University of Pennsylvania shared her space and observed this firsthand. Finally, a century after she entered the program through which she became one of the 20th century's greatest architects of China, we honor the person, her success as a student at Penn, and her career. Thank you.
Good afternoon. It's a distinct pleasure to be here at this gathering. You start on projects, you always know there's going to be a time and a date when the show goes on. And it's always an incredible feeling to see the gathering, the energy that comes with events like this. And it was really a great honor to be a part of of this program, of this honorary degree. So I'm here as an archivist. I'm here as a collections person. I'm here because I learn and explore and experience the past through objects that we hold in places like the architectural archives. These are items that carry energy and inspire in the present day. And it's something that anyone who works in an archive gets to see. And it's usually that aha moment that when we're sitting at our desk and someone is doing research, that we know someone has made a connection. And so for me, I wanted to try something today. So I brought 3 objects that I'm going to share with you today, and we'll see how this goes. And these are objects that allow us to connect very specifically with Lin Huiyin and her experience at Penn. And it also is a way that I have come to know how significant she is as a figure in culture, in history, in imagination today. And it is the most tangible connection we have for her time as a student here at Penn to the present. And so I bring her transcript to you, and I put the mic on so I can walk forward. And this is the experimental part, because you are doing, this is how I'm going to get in every family photo album in China. Because what you're seeing, and archivists never get to see anything like this, I think, except, the kind of intensity of wanting to see something like this, wanting to connect with it. I took it out of its protective wrapper so you get the best photos, but usually we keep it in that wrapper so people can touch it. And there's a certain sort of intensity that objects can connect us with the past that I think, you guys are demonstrating in how you're looking at things right now, okay? So this was the object that we used to help really document the incredible academic record of Lin Huiyin here at Penn. And, it shows that she took all the classes. And without this as an object, without this as a thing that we could go to, we could turn to and look at every line and recognize that, well, there were other women studying at Penn and taking architecture courses. Nobody came close to what she was doing, okay? So this is a very special object, and it was really fun to walk it into the middle of the audience with you today, okay? So let me put it back in its archival sleeve. Okay. So a second object that I bring to you is not in its original form, but in some ways is no less poignant. This is a letter that is kept in the University Archives and Records Center, and the call number is a little bit cut off, but it is in the School of Design Dean's Records under George Coyle. It's correspondence, past students, L to M, 1934 to 36. Okay, so that's after Lin was a student, and yet she's writing to the then dean, George Coyle, with a request and asking for his help. But before asking for help, what she says, and I'm quoting, before everything else, I must tell you the following facts. And I'm quoting Lin. I was graduated in February 1927 when Dr. Laird was the dean of the school. Before entering school, I expected to be admitted to the Department of Architecture, but since at that time the course was officially not open to women, I had to be registered in the Department of Fine Arts. And I took all the architectural subjects as electives allowed me. In this way, I completed all 4 grades of architectural design and the course in histories and graphics, etc. I shall not go into details here as there must be records in the school. Just showed you that record, okay? In other words, and again, I'm quoting, I took practically all the subjects that are required to graduate as an architect. To some, I was admitted as an auditor, although not given credit. So that little bit of detail, maybe she actually sat in on some of the classes that she was not allowed to take. And I may say that I was in the Department of Fine Arts majoring in architecture. So she was trying to find an accommodation. When I was appointed part-time student instructor in architectural design for well over a year during a period extending from several months before my graduation to a term after that. I also worked in different offices during the summers, once in Paul Cray's when I was in the States. So this, Sydney Wong, a colleague and a scholar who's been doing a lot of work, found this a month or so ago. It opens a little window. And in particular, I highlight, okay, you see my green highlighter? That's not on the original. She's teaching design, okay? There were a few other women in the course at that time who were taking classes. Two of them, Gertrude Olmsted Neumann and Betty Sutro Bendiner, were taking studio classes, architecture 2 or 3. The studios were 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 was with Paul Cray. So architecture 2 and 3 and 4. So in the fall of 26 and spring of 27, these two women would have been students who Lin would have been her instructor or their instructor, okay? That to me is pretty exciting for the following reason. And this requires me to put on gloves and to walk over here. And to ask you to move. I didn't get to practice this, so bear with me. These are not cotton gloves. These are the crappy latex ones. Okay. So a few years ago, we got a call from an architectural historian who was retiring from teaching at the State University in Poughkeepsie, New York. And he had some materials related to Charles Clowder, who's a great collegiate Gothic architect. He also had some drawings by an early woman who studied at Penn, so Gertrude Olmsted Neumann, okay? So he donated them, and they're precious for the very fact that they are drawings by a woman who studied at Penn. And I think it's really safe to say that Lin, just realize there were women in the building, and the TA, the student instructor, had to be a woman. They had to be in a separate space on the first floor of Hayden Hall. The men were upstairs. So this is a drawing that Lin would have stood over and looked at and helped critique and helped this woman, Gertrude Olmsted Neumann, to develop her skills as an architect, okay? So is Lin's hand on this? Maybe, maybe not. The mentorship of how you teach and learn how to draw? Maybe. There's a wonderful drawing downstairs where you can see an architect, Yang Ting Bao, working with an American architect and learning the practice of how to draw really well. So these are things that maybe we have to do a little bit more work with, but since very few, if any, drawings that Lin actually made when she was a student here survive, maybe we have to look to objects like this to help us understand what it was like to be a student, what you were trying to achieve, where you were trying to get, what were the skills involved, okay? So I've just given you a few examples here. The kind of energy that you see in a figure like Lin Huiyin, and that is living in a room like this today, that you can find these little connections with, is, I think, a very precious thing. And from the point of view of a collections person, someone who's an archive, when you see those objects come to life, when you see people go, ah, or they say, ah, or they get excited in that way, that's very special. And so please never forget that sort of energy. Events like this are wonderful, and maybe they are kind of a once in a lifetime sort of thing. Let's hope not. Let's hope not. So thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And it's just not fair. I don't have the kind of show and tell material, and I don't have the kind of scholarship of Nancy. So I'm just gonna, I'm really here not as a scholar, really a fan, a fan of Lin. I am not a scholar, not a historian, but I am an architect, a female architect, and a female Chinese architect at that. So I think Lin holds very, very special meaning for people like us. I came to know Lin and Liang very late. I actually first heard about them as a graduate student at Princeton. And I think mainly it's because of the censorship between the straits, between Taiwan and the US, that my Chinese education in Taiwan was kind of imbalanced. So, you know, they were not really talked about. And I couldn't really read books about them. And also my education at Berkeley, it was great under Spiro Kostov. We were learning architecture history through Spiro's famous lectures. But I think the entire 4 years that I was at Berkeley, we spent 2 hours covering the history of Asian architecture. So obviously, Lin and Liang, they were not in the lectures. So it was in Princeton that I took a seminar outside of the architecture school at the nearby art history department on a class called History of Chinese Landscape and Gardens. And I was introduced to Wilma Fairbanks, Liang and Lin, Liang and Lin, Partners in Exploring China's Architectural Past. It was written in 1994. And immediately I was mesmerized, of course, by the couple, but particularly by Lin and her story. And now, as the head of the architecture department here, what I want to do is to not just come as myself, but as someone who represents the department. I asked people in the department to give me some contribution on things that I can read here. And so today I bring in 2 paragraphs from students and 1 from a faculty. And unfortunately, I can't read all of them here. I got quite a few emails, but many of them were in Chinese, and I simply don't have the time to translate them and read them. So I'm reading the ones that were sent to me in English. So and the students, they unfortunately they wish to be anonymous, so I can't tell you who they are. The first student wrote, in high school, to broaden my knowledge for the college entrance exam, I read about the contributions of Lin Huiyin and Liang Sicheng to the preservation of historical buildings. When the newly established People's Republic of China planned to demolish the ancient capital to build a new government, Lin Huiyin and Liang Sicheng strongly opposed it. They argue that if the ancient city walls were torn down, it would be regretted in the future, and a fake version would have to be built to preserve the historical culture. Unfortunately, the walls were demolished, and their predictions came true, that a fake version had to be reconstructed. Additionally, I read many poems by Lin Huiyin and Xu Zhimo, which were very emotional and filled with a sense of patriotism. This deepened my interest in architecture and prompted me to switch from civil engineering to architecture at Zhongjie University. And since then, that student has come to Penn to study architecture. And from a professor here, Fernando Lara, who's here in the back, he wrote, the celebration of the professional contributions of Lin Huiyin to the field of architecture and historic preservation positions her as a pioneer female scholar of the built environment in the beginnings of the 20th century. Alongside Margaret Schutt Licholsky from 1897, Carmen Portinho from 1903, and Catherine Bauer, 1905. And if you have not heard much about these names, there's one more reason why you need to revisit the erasure of women architects from our scholarship. And I think this is hugely important. Erasure of women architects or misrepresentations of their identity is a very big topic, which we won't get into today. But in the case of Lin, she is hugely popular. So she's definitely not erased in contemporary culture. But on the other hand, I think she's often remembered for the wrong reason, which is, I think, equally problematic. Lin is not seen really as a person, a whole person in the psyche of the Chinese contemporary culture. She is more of a symbol, an icon, known for her talent, beauty, intellect. There's a term for this in Chinese called 才女. But even as a 才女, I think she falls victim to the contemporary media's overly, quote, romanticization and melodramatic reinvention, mainly center around her love life. And this is a quote from The Architecturing of Modern Love and the Architecturing of Modern Architecture, revisiting Lin Huiyin by Jia Ruo, who is also here today. And some facts from that article she wrote. Although Lin Huiyin never published a book in her life, there are currently 391 publications in which she is listed as author, with the majority being published in the 2010s. In the 2010s and after. And I think largely contributing to a very popular soap opera, which had a lot of false information in there, but it was sensational in China. Lin Huiyin is also a major presence on the internet. A Google search yields 2.5 million hits, while one on the Chinese search engine Baidu exceeded 100 million. And to set these figures in perspective, a search for the contemporary it girl, Bella Hadid, gets only 6.4 million hits on Baidu and 70 million on Google. So this is a primary reason for her status as a mass media legend lies in this discourse in her love life. So this is also from Jia Ruo. And another Penn student who sent me her contribution, she picked up on this problem, and this is her paragraph, and I'm quoting her. Initially, my knowledge of Lin Huiyin was mostly limited to her rumor relationships with other talented individuals. Later, I learned that she, along with Liang Sicheng, was dedicated to the restoration of ancient Chinese architecture. Discovering her story or studying at the University of Pennsylvania made me admire her courage as a woman in that era. I believe that awarding degrees to women is a crucial way to acknowledge their contributions. Too many remarkable women in history are forgotten, their identities reduced to being someone's wife or lover. Similarly, Lin Huiyin is often remembered merely as Liang Sicheng's wife, rather for her own achievements. Even though she collaborated with Liang Sicheng, her contributions are often attributed to him. For me, and this is a student speaking also, her past achievements are deeply impressive and admirable. But the current misunderstanding about her legacy are a cautionary tale for women who seek to protect and uphold their own contributions. I am very grateful for this award. I think she means the diploma, as it brings her efforts to light and allows more people to recognize and appreciate her work. So I, as a department chair, am so happy that this is happening when we have students from China who are here studying architecture, maybe because of her, and they're also within this discourse of changing disciplines and changing kind of the conversation about female architects. Last night's commencement and today's ceremony for Lin, I think, is really celebrating Lin for who she is. Walked the world as a person who walked the world as a multi-dimensional individual in complex networks and equal to others just as they were to her. And this is also a quote by Jia Ruo. So I think there's no better work to actually show her true self than her poetry. And that's why I chose to read one of her poems last night at the commencement speech. But I realized afterwards, because people came to me and asked, oh, who was that poet? I realized that maybe I wasn't very clear that I was reading a poem by Lin. I had wanted to read the poem first and then tell people who the poet was. And that was supposed to be, you know, a moment of like enlightenment for people, but I think that kind of got lost. So today I'm going to close with one of her poems, a very significant poem because she lived within this paradigm shift between transition of feudal China to modern China, but also a war-torn China. And if you look at the history of Sino-Japanese War, 1939 to 1945, she wrote this poem in 1939. So this is 2 years after the Japanese invaded China, and it was first released or published in Hong Kong, 大公报, so the newspaper in Hong Kong. And what is really interesting is the one that I read yesterday, I read through 5 different English translations. I picked the one that I thought was the best. But still, I wish I have time to work on maybe translating her poetry. Maybe this is something that I can do after I retire, because I definitely don't have the time while working here. But or maybe if I have contributions from students, I'll talk to volunteers later who can work with me to work on this. But this is the poem I'm going to read today is really interesting because while the Chinese version was released in 1939, and then there's an English version that was found, I think, in the 40s. People actually don't know if the original was English or Chinese. Why? Because there were at least 6 mistakes in Chinese version. So the words are different because when they looked at the English version and they matched the English version with the Chinese, they felt that the words, because there was probably hand copy, so a lot of the words were copied wrong. So this leads to a debate whether she actually wrote it in English first. And I think that's amazing. And also, having read the 6 different versions yesterday, looking for an English version to read in commencement, I thought this English didn't sound like a translation. It sounded like an original composition. And furthermore, the name of it is in English is called Flowers on New Year's Eve. This is not a New Year's Eve, but we are celebrating. And what this shows us is in celebration, there are still a lot of complexities. We are happy about the celebration, like she was happy about being on New Year's Eve, and she's just bought flowers in a nearby village. But she was a foreigner in this village because she's running from the war and she's retreating to a foreign place that she didn't know. And so there's all this complex feelings in her. And I think she really told a story that I think we can relate to today. In our celebration, I think there are a lot of things happening in the world that we can't really be truly happy about. And so that, she's really encapsulated that complexity of the world in turmoil in this poem. So I will read it now. Newly bought from the babble of village dialects in the market. So she's in this place where people are speaking a dialect that she doesn't understand. Long branches of snow white peach blossom and blood red camellia flowers in my little corner room make a new freshness, but do not sharpen the wounded feelings. Even blunted feelings scarcely remain. I know well that the quietness in my room is like a plum season run to seed. The misty memories of my village have receded, and time has been suspended. The new year is not a feast day. The lanterns seem to shed drops of blood. The flowers do not remind me of old passion or former words spoken. If I recall the fragrance of past feeling, like winding path, it comes through a maze of roads and hedges. A tangle of flowers, leaves and branches, and the scent of grass intoxicates the senses. But today our steps no longer tread the soil of former days. The moonlight has become frozen. It picks out the chains of mountains, the disorder and turmoil of rivers, broods over the horse-trodden plain, still as a picture. The New Year flowers are no longer flowers, but only words an emptiness, quivering with a million people's care. Every heart feels foreboding. So I want to give my special thanks to Fritz. It's emotional for me to think that, someone who, an American, so far away in UPenn, would give the past 2 years to this moment. Thank you.
Many thanks to all three colleagues. What a beautiful set of presentations, history, artifacts, poems, beautiful poems, as well as students and faculty's letters to Lin. And I want to also shout out to other colleagues who have contributed to this endeavor in various ways, including Jeff, Michael, Sonia, Naomi, Rebecca, and many others that I cannot name here, I cannot list here, who have really been working very, very hard until this day. So, and I also want to express our appreciation to the support from Penn Global and Penn Wharton China Center. We are thrilled to have many distinguished guests traveling from other parts of the United States and from China, including senior scholars from fellow institutions. I will introduce 3 of them and invite them here for brief remarks. The first scholar is Dr. Wang Lifan, professor of Tsinghua University School of Architecture, which Lin and Liang co-founded. Professor Wang specialized in traditional Chinese architecture and gardens, and she has designed many award-winning buildings and landscapes, among them Lin Huiyin's memorial in Hangzhou. The second speaker, Dr. Wang Lan, served as the Dean of the College of Architecture and Urban Planning at Zhongjie University. She is an acclaimed expert on planning and policies for healthy cities and infrastructure developments, among other areas. Notably, she is the first woman to lead Zhongjie's prestigious College of Architecture and Planning, as well as the first female dean among the top architectural institutions in China. Finally, Dr. Zhang Qing is a researcher at Harvard University's Chem Lab. She is a prolific author, having published 2 best-selling biographies of modern Chinese architects trained by Penn. She is also a historic conservationist and has been involved in such successful restoration projects like Pingjianlou in Suzhou. So I want to invite Professor Wang Lifan to the podium.
Thank you, Professor Lin, for the introduction. And thank you, Dean Mr. Steiner, for your invitation. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm honored to be on the campus and to be the part of this special ceremony. The topic of my speech is Huiyin Lin, an unconventional life. Huiyin started her career path unconventionally. Accompanied by her father at the age of 16, Huiyin had a wonderful tour in Europe. That tour greatly changed her and opened her to new ideas. Knowing that female architects were rare even in Europe, she still made up her mind to become one. Lin's study at the University of Pennsylvania was unconventional not eligible to pursue a degree in architecture, she took courses in both departments of fine arts and architecture and completed them successfully. Lin's dedication to architecture, education, practice, and preservation was unconventional. A courageous woman, Lin made multiple expeditions into the remote wilderness, which at the time was so rare for an elegant and intellectual lady. This probably was the only case in China or one of the few in the world. Even more unconventional was her understanding of ancient Chinese architecture. She coined the unique concept of architecture spirit to supplement to the Chinese traditional way of describing beautiful scenery, such as poetic and idyllic. She once wrote, "In the gentle play of light and shadow, harmonious outlines are draped in lively colors bestowed by the wind and dew. At any relic of city gate or one corner of the foundation of one's majestic palace, the soul whispered or even sings about the mystery changes by time." Her conversation with her children was unconventional. One day in 1946, shortly after the victory of the ancient Japanese war, her son asked her, what would have happened if the Japanese army conquered our town back in 1944? Huiyin answered, "There would be indeed another way to escape. Isn't there the Yangtze River in front of our town?" Meaning she would not hesitate to end her life in the Yangtze River. Her son was totally stoned. "So you would just leave us behind?" Holding her son's hand, she apologetically replied with soft voice, "If that had happened, I'm afraid I would have no other choice." Lin's design philosophy for the national emblem was unconventional. Lin and her husband Liang had a deep understanding of and respect for the Chinese traditional culture. The insightful and comprehensive research of Chinese ancient architecture and Huiyin's background of the fine arts and architecture played an important role in the design of the national emblem. Many inspiring ideas originated from Huiyin. Huiyin Lin Memorial by the West Lake in the city of Hangzhou, which I designed, is an unconventional presentation. Instead of a piece of a solid figure, Huiyin stands as a carved-out silhouette, surrounded by her own words on architecture spirit, as quoted above. Amidst the reflection of the lake and the mountains, it conveys a distant and ethereal sense of unattainable longing in a distinctly Chinese way. Since the completion of the memorials 17 years ago, her image in the public view has also become unconventional. The fact that today Penn is awarding the posthumous Bachelor of Architecture degree is another way of honoring her unconventional legacy. Looking back in the past century and consider the current state of the world we are facing, it is especially meaningful that we are here celebrating the communication and the friendship between the two countries. This helps promote the development of architecture exchange and marks a new chapter in our history. We have already started posting short stories about Huiyin in official accounts of the School of Architecture of Tsinghua University. I sincerely hope you can join us. Thank you very much.
Dear friends, as we gather here today at the University of Pennsylvania, a place where the seeds of architectural innovation were sown in the mind of one of China's most influential architects. We come together to honor the remarkable legacy of Huiyin Lin. I am deeply honored to stand here before you as the first female dean of College of Architecture and Urban Planning at Zhongjie University in China, a position that made possible by the pioneering spirit of trailblazer of Huiyin Lin. Born in Hangzhou, China, she embarked on a journey that would leave an indelible mark on the landscape of both Chinese and Western architecture. At the University of Pennsylvania, Huiyin Lin honed her craft, blending Western architectural principles with the rich tapestry of traditional Chinese culture. Her time here not only shaped her professional trajectory, but also ignited a passion for bridging cultural divides through architecture. Right on this campus, she became a visionary, a bridge between worlds, who understood the importance of preserving China's rich architectural heritage while embracing the innovation of the modern world. Through her work, she breathed new life into ancient structures, blending the old with the new in a harmonious symphony of design. From her detailed documentation of iconic wooden pagoda of Yinxian to her pivotal role in advocating for the preservation of the Great Wall of China and many other landmarks, Huiyin Lin's impact on the architectural landscape of China is immeasurable. By Huiyin Lin's legacy extended far beyond her status as trailblazer for women in the field of architecture. As a female architect in China, Huiyin Lin shattered glass ceilings and paved the way for countless women within and outside the architecture field. Her courage and determination serve as a testament to the power of perseverance in the face of adversity. She becomes a beacon of inspiration for generations to come. Today, as we reflect on her contributions, but let us not only celebrate her achievement, but also rededicate ourselves to carrying forward her legacy. Let us continue to build bridges between cultures, to push the boundaries of innovation, and to honor the rich tapestry of our architectural heritage. So, in line with that thought, I would like to take a moment to reflect on the fruitful collaborations between the Yopan School of Design and Zhongjie College of Architecture and Urban Planning over the past 2 decades, while also casting an eye toward future endeavors. In 2006, our Department of Architecture partnered with Yopan School of Design and the Faculty of Architecture and the University of Hong Kong to undertake a joint design workshop focused on historical preservation. This initiative marked the beginning of a series of academic exchanges between the Yopan School of Design and Zhongjie College of Architecture and Urban Planning. The deans of those schools have reciprocated visits on numerous occasions. Additionally, our institutions have engaged in various other collaborative efforts, including seminars, exhibitions, conferences, and joint research projects. Looking ahead, we anticipate a vibrant future of deepened partnerships. We are poised to explore new frontiers in architectural innovation, urban planning, urban health studies, and sustainable design, harnessing the latest technologies and methodologies. Our ongoing collaboration will likely expand to include more interdisciplinary projects that bridge other faculties and departments, enhancing our academic and cultural exchanges. This will enrich the educational experience for students and faculty alike, providing more opportunities for international research initiatives and professional development. By leveraging our combined resources and expertise, we can contribute more effectively to addressing some of the most pressing challenges in architecture and urban development today. In summary, the future holds great potential for more dynamic and impactful collaborations between our 2 esteemed institutions and other institutions, continuing to foster an environment of learning and innovation that transcends borders. Finally, may we all be inspired by Huiyin's example as we strive to create a more beautiful, more inclusive world through the power of architecture. Now we actually have more and more female students in the field of architecture, urban planning, landscape architecture. They may fade away in their career because of various reasons. I'm hoping that with the inspiration of Lin, they could go beyond their limit and pursue their dreams bravely. Thank you.
I'm Zhongjie. Thank you all for inviting me here. It's a high honor for any architect to speak at this moment in this place. However, I feel no pressure because I'm one of the followers. This is not only a celebration, but also a beginning. Lin Huiyin, or Fritz Huiyin Lin, lived only 51 years. During most of her short lifetime, she was forgotten as a scholar by both sides, by the public. There is an old saying, East is East, and West is West, and never the twain shall meet. Today we meet here for her, but also for many people like her. Her unceasing struggle as a female architect inspires us, as well as the young generation of architects. Why is Lin so special? We discussed a lot these days. We might find answers to 4 questions from the speech of John F. Kennedy in 1961 in Boston, where I am living. First, were we true men of courage, with the courage to stand up to one's enemies, and the courage to stand up, when necessary, to one's associates, the courage to resist public pressure as well as private greed. Secondly, were we true men of judgment, with perceptive judgment of the future as well as the past, of our own mistakes as well as the mistakes of others, with enough wisdom to know that we did not know, and enough candor to admit it. Third, were we true men of integrity, men who never ran out on either the principles in which we believe and the people who believed in them, men who believed in us, men who neither financial gain nor political ambition can ever divert from the fulfillment of our sacred trust. Finally, were we true men of dedication, with an honor mortgaged to no single individual nor group, and compromised of no private obligation or aim, but devoted solely to serving the public good and the national interest. Lin's life answered these questions in her own way, and today, the Penn community gives the answers to what makes this happen. Today's celebration is a beginning. Penn will provide more and more answers to satisfy all professors, scholars, and students, surpassing their races, genders, religions, and backgrounds. Chinese architects will also give their own answers. We meet here today, and we will let East and West meet in the future. Thank you all.
Thanks to all our guest speakers. I would like to also extend our acknowledgement to our collaborators, partners, many of them in China, including our co-curation team of Building in China, led by Professor Tong Ming and Professor Li Xiangning, and their colleagues at Southeast University and Zhongjie University. Now I would like to invite all speakers to the front for a 20-minute discussion. Okay. So as a moderator, I have the privilege to ask the first question, and maybe my only question. And I want to just ask a very brief question for each of you. Using a phrase, can you describe one quality or aspect of Lin's legacy that kind of resonate deeply with you, most deeply with you? You can extend your answer by a few sentences to, if you like.
She was good at climbing ladders.
What kind of ladders?
The image that is on the wonderful book, it shows her climbing a ladder, doing a very careful survey of an element of architectural history and engaging with it very closely. But one of the facts that you learn about architectural history and women's role in the professions is climbing a ladder literally on a job site was an impediment because of the clothes that were being worn, social norms and things like that. So she was good at climbing ladders. Let's stick with that.
We're looking at many pictures of her on top of heaven temple, the temple of heaven and other wooden structures in Shanxi province. Okay, great. Next, Nancy.
One sentence. Fearless pioneer who faced unexpected challenges in her personal life and politically, and nevertheless pursued her dream and changed China.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Rossana?
I think you have
Yeah.
to turn that on.
Since yesterday, I'm sure those of you who are in Chinese social media, you've noticed in WeChat, just like tons of articles and quick posts about what happened yesterday during commencement. And there was one that was circulating about keywords that she used in architecture, in her architectural kind of discourse and exploration. And I was taken by, I think, two words, truth and simplicity. And I feel that she was really true to herself in, not letting others define what she can do and not letting even disciplines define what architecture is. She pursued things that she wanted to pursue. So she was really true to her own passion. And then the simplicity, I think it's difficult to point to her design work to see the simplicity, even though I think it's definitely there, explicit. It's just difficult right now in this setting. But I think the simplicity from the poetry that I read, if you know Chinese language and Chinese literature and Chinese poetry, it was revolutionary what she and a group of her contemporaries, the way that they revolutionized the language of Chinese. So they were able to use prose, the common language that is spoken, and made it into literature. So I think, that goes beyond her contribution to architecture, but at the same time, it's contributing, bringing simplicity into everything we do.
Wonderful. I see Dr. Zhongjie.
Yeah, I think my speech just now have already answered your questions. So I mentioned 4 words, and the first is the courage, and the second is judgment, the third is integrity, and the fourth is the dedication. But actually, I wish I can be like her, full of courage. So courage, I think, yeah. If I only can choose one of them.
Thank you. In my mind, Lin was like a brave white seagull flying freely over the sea. Just that. Thank you.
All right. I think the one word I would choose that to describe the Lin's spirit that resonate to me the most is poetry. Because I think for her, it's not only her professional, her achievement, but also her whole life trying to balance the difficulties and also the beauty of life. And poetry is the word also very appropriate for our disciplines, actually. Like architecture, urban planning, landscape architecture, we tried our best to really create dwellings that will help us living a beautiful, more inclusive, but also very poetic world. I think this is very important. Also to integrate science and art, and through architecture, through the beauty, through the poem. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for your answers. I think they definitely resonate with me, because it seems to me that Lin's life has been about balancing 2 extremes, right? On the one hand, is as an artist, she pursues freedom, beauty, and simplicity. But on the other hand, the life was very complicated. The war, the politics, and also her physical conditions all kind of prevent her from kind of pursuing these goals, but she nevertheless persisted and continued and made such a remarkable contribution to us. Okay, I think it's time to open up to the floor, and I'd like to welcome you to make any comments or ask any question to any of these speakers. Okay, Professor Chen, please introduce yourself before you. Is that another mic?
Thank you. I'm Chen Feng from Zhongjie University. Thanks all of the speakers. I learned a lot from all of you. So I appreciate it very much. I have some questions. I know that Lin Huiyin had two outstanding contributions. At the age of 28, she firstly divided the Chinese architecture history into four periods. That is the beginning, mature, Corby, and decline. It was influenced by Winckelmann's ideas. And the second one, she pointed out the structural rationalism features of Chinese architecture. These two aspects were combined, and the structural rationalism features of the division of the four periods was from the perspective of the structuralism. So I want to know where did his ideas of structural rationalism come from? Was it from Paul Cray or some other kind of background of that period? Maybe some professors could answer this question for me. Maybe Professor Nancy Steinhardt or Professor William Whittaker, who can answer these questions?
Well, it might have been from Paul Cray. If it wasn't from Paul Cray, it was from a professor at Penn. I think those four periods reflect the education based on European, especially Beaux-Arts education that she was taught here.
And Paul Cray also stressed that structural rationalism at that time. Are there some documents about it, maybe in your archive? You have some documents about Paul Cray.
We definitely have documents of Paul Cray. And, he was someone who, in his education from France at the École des Beaux-Arts, they were balancing an understanding of the classical world, what you might see in the ancient world of Rome, against the modern world and against the way that you build now, and thinking in terms that were less revolutionary and more evolutionary. And so we had an occasion yesterday to bring out some of Professor Cray's drawings to share with the family and the special guests who had traveled from China. And they were Cray's own student drawings that he made while he was in Paris. And I chose to bring those out just to remind ourselves about this moment when you're a student and you're absorbing so much of the world around. But a piece that was there is Cray doing a survey drawing of an ancient medieval Gothic cathedral. And the Gothic is a very rational sort of building type. The structure is very well expressed. And it's a modest chapel, but it's a measured drawing. And this idea of looking at the past, engaging with it, and understanding its logic and character, and bringing it into your thinking, your experience, is something that you see in the Cray collection that we have in the architectural archives. There's Cray materials. Really, it's his personal papers are here at Penn. The drawings are in the archives. The papers are over in the Rare Books and Manuscripts collection. And there's also drawings at the Athenaeum of Philadelphia. But if you want to come to the architectural archives, you just have to make an appointment. And we can sit down and chat for an hour.
Thank you. I'm a first-year master student in UPenn Electrical Engineering program. And my question is, as you have just mentioned, One of Lin and his husband's contribution is that they spend a lot of effort in protect Chinese architecture and also the culture under the invasion of Japanese. But it seems that for today, the crisis has disappeared because you can see both in America and China, many buildings and infrastructures arise under the investment of government. So my question is, what is the value and meaning for Lin spirit for today? Yeah.
Rossana?
Zhongjie, you want to answer it?
Oh yeah.
No, I was going to say maybe you want to answer that one.
I mean, I can jump in and
Something, yeah, please.
just say, I mean, it's such the value and meaning of an artist's spirit today, if I can simplify it like that. And so for me, someone who works in an archive where what you have are the drawings, the thinking process, we just have a few things related to Lin, but I can speak from the many other collections we have to give you a sense of seeing an interesting mind at work. Are you, as a student, not trying to figure out your way in the world right now? And you're trying to take in the complexity of the world and all its many facets and trying to develop your own awareness and sensibility about how to move forward in a productive way, and perhaps even a way that can achieve art and real connection that, 100 years after you arrive in a place like Penn, there's a bunch of people gathered in a building that you, as a student, I'm speaking as Lin, walked into. We're here and asking questions about this incredible mind, this interesting person who faced great challenges and did something interesting and lasting. So that to me just seems the fundamental reason why connecting with what happens before how people think is a productive thing to do today.
Rossana?
First of all, it's a great question because you're very honest about your curiosity, why this is even important. And I would say, I think precisely because architecture isn't engineering. Architecture, there's a very important aspect of creativity in architecture that demands an understanding of history and heritage for us to move forward. Because it's not purely functional meaning in the engineering sense. The function in architecture is also a kind of cultural production and cultural memory. And I think Lin specifically had written about what she thinks the importance and function of architecture is, which is, I think there was an excerpt that I read on the writing where she talks about the building as a container for history. And so when you see a building, you can understand where we come from.
I think we here and one over there.
Thank you. I'm actually a journalist from Xinhua News Agency in China, and this is a very wonderful experience to audit this symposium. My question is, I'm wondering, their depth of knowledge. Lin, sorry. So I think professors, whoever want to answer this question.
I would like to answer that. Yesterday after commencement, I went back and my landlord was having a dinner party with a group of alumni from the 80s. They were architecture students in the 80s.
they were sitting around the table, and I just wanted to chat with them, get to know them a bit, and I sat there and then explain to them what just happened. Semester here, and I found that they actually don't know. They don't know who Lin is, Liang, and Lin. They don't know that entire history, which means I feel that their understanding of the impact of Penn as a school of architecture is missing some important components. So after hearing that, I feel that one of my missions is for subsequent talks today who come here, no matter where they come from, to understand how important it was in the entire genealogy or lineage of modern Chinese.
Okay, indulge me for. I want to repeat my the architecture journalist. But also, we have this sort of a conjuncture point, not only between the two countries, but also two cultures, American Chinese culture with the architecture as a medium. To what extent do you think it is important for the countries jointly remember Phyllis Lin and Liang Sicheng as a giant like cultural figures and to mutual understanding and cultural exchange?
抱歉，我先用中文。我们现在看这两位这个人物啊，我们认为他是大师啊，但是他们从 UPenn 学了回去是很年轻的人，当他们家学渊源很长，但是他们是很年轻的人，所以这个时候我觉得很重要一点是他们要确立一个非常值得一生努力的目标，然后把他们在 UPenn 所学或者在游欧洲所看到的思考的，然后跟中国这个很深的一个建筑文化的传统要进行一个比对，或者是一个互相的这个推进啊，对它的认识，他们是从测量开始，这显然不是中国原来的认识情况，是用了这个新的西方的眼光去再看中国，然后加上他们原来的对中国传统的这个原有的深刻的认识，然后再用宋代的这一套东西再认识，所以是一个多重的认识。我想这个多重认识的价值是很不同的。如果他只用一种来认识，是没有那么有意义的，他的这个遗产没有那么丰富。那么中国传统的东西又有它这个建筑是完全的独立的一个社会体系里头生长出来的，它自己有一个生命力或者基因系统在那里，所以这个复杂的一种视角，多重的一种这个分析，使得我们对中国建筑的一些内在的价值可以很好的给他认识到。所以我觉得他们最终的这个历史的这个中国建筑史图像中国建筑史这本书在美国能出版，当然历经非常多的坎坷，在美国能够出版，虽然没有把他们全部的对中国建筑的认识都写进去，但是对于西方就是他们原来学的这个方向，他们看到了很多不同。我觉得就说我们一般的两种文明的交流和互鉴吧，可能是一个广泛的事情，他们就深深的揪住建筑这一点，因为它是文化的汇集，所以我觉得建筑的交流，学科的交流是很有价值的一个人文交流。谢谢。
Let me briefly translate Professor Wang's remarks. Was not prepared to be an interpreter. But she said that when Liang and Lin returned to China, they were very young. They were looking for a goal, and they found, and they decided, very determined to dedicate themselves to interpreting Chinese architecture to the West and using the scientific method to study Chinese architecture. And they use many methods they learn here, including, for example, the measure join, very accurate measure join of the Western architectural system. And to complement the more empirical studies of Chinese architecture from traditional the tradition that passed down by generations or dynasties. And their work really combine this Western and Eastern influence together. And they feel that they want to do the same, like kind of this communication should be mutual. And they intended to publish the book on Chinese architecture in English. And it took a long time. It took a great effort for them. And the inspiration for us is, according to Professor Wang, is that this multiple perspective, multi angles in looking at anything from scholarship to anything else, practice of architecture and other aspects. I think this may be, and there's a common ground between the West and the East. Need to be consolidated. That can be continue to be built, and I think the work of Lin sort of exemplify these efforts. Okay, this. Thank you. Two more questions. Let's say because I think two, because I saw three before I cut it off, so I have to let both of you to ask. So Zhangxian, please, you go first, and then the student.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Jason Zhongjie. I'm a postdoc researcher at Weitzman School of Design, working on video energy. Actually, we talk about a lot about the Philip Lin's like learning experience here, and we also know that she's a co-founder of the Chinese like architecture education, especially like in Tsinghua University. Very interesting about Bill just mentioned, like the Lin has a lot of teaching experience. Just you just mentioned. I'm just curious about, do we have any like knowledge about how like her teaching experience contribute to the Chinese like architecture like education? Because we talk about a lot about what she learned here to contribute to the Chinese architecture program. Maybe this is a specific question for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, I think Nancy might have something to say on this too, for sure. But the bringing the object up, the drawing, was a way for me to show a very specific instance where she was standing with people almost her own age, and she was seen as a teacher, as somebody that could connect with people and help guide them. And so those sorts of things, there's not any written record of what her aims or goals were, so much as it was identifying the fact that in that moment, there was nobody else to do it. And she was really good at what she was doing as a student. So the faculty turned to her and say, there's a group of younger women, people who are following you, who are interested in the way that you are. Will you help them? Okay, we'll pay you, I guess. But, I think that's an important, interpersonal, human to human sort of example. Of course, in understanding the pedagogy of education here at Penn, the transcript that I brought out and showed you, that lists all the classes that she took. Scholars have been using that as a basis to start to unpack the specifics of an education that she had here at Penn, devoid of having any of her notes, devoid of having any of those kind of tangible vestiges of the past that you can start to connect with to understand the specifics. But she had a great Beaux-Arts education at one of the great schools in America at the time. She had classmates and colleagues who were American, who were from Europe, South America. from Asia, from China, and there's a whole group of people who were studying here intensively and would have brought that pedagogical method back to China.
So there's a biography of Liang Sicheng with 3 authors. Guo Daiheng, who knew them well, is one of them. And in this, it's been translated into English. In this book, there is a list of the courses in the curriculum that they designed at Tsinghua. And so you can see everything that was offered and can compare it with what she did at Penn, and also with the other curricula that were being developed across China, especially at Southeast or at Nanjing University at that time.
Yeah, as we know, her first job in China when she was back to China is the co-founder of the architecture department in Northeastern University. That's in 1920s. And she together with Liang Sicheng set up all the color creams. Most of them are like the copies from UPenn, but they also added some special color creams like the history of Chinese fine arts and history of Chinese sculptures. And later in 1940s, especially during 1946 to 47, when Liang Sicheng was in America, yeah, and she actually is the co-founder of Tsinghua Department of Architecture, though her name is not listed there. I wish someday Tsinghua University will, like UPenn, correct their, how to say that. I hope so.
Thank you so much. My name is Hannah. I'm a grad student from Princeton University, and I will join Penn as postdoc in the fall. So as a first generation international student, I was wondering what Lin Huiyin's experience was like as a foreign student at Penn. Did she experience any cultural shock? Secondly, how, as Professor Hu mentioned, Lin is extremely popular in China. How should we perceive this kind of popularity? Does it interfere with telling her true stories, or can Penn utilize this kind of popularity to promote and tell her true story? Thank you.
Such a great question. The daily experiences of a student are generally not the topics of discussion 100 years after they were a student, but we all know who have been part of architecture education as students, what you get in studio, the conversations, the learning environment of that intensity is very special and engaging. But in terms of things that we can have to account for their experience here, there are newspaper articles. The students from China did very well in the program generally, and so you see newspaper articles related to the graduation. But in the year that, and in the semester that Lin, Liang, and others graduated, it's accounting for the entirety of the University of Pennsylvania's graduation, but there is an oval-shaped image in the Philadelphia Inquirer or the Record where it's these 3 individuals, Liang and Lin and another individual who I've forgotten at this moment, posing, and it's like they're quoting these individuals for being kind of someone who's come from a far off distant place and getting an education at Penn. Very interesting stuff. But one of the articles that I found very poignant was Lin herself accounting for her experience of the city and places that she would go and she would spend time. These are very kind of magical sort of things. And Philly's a busy city and there's lots of noise, and it was a dirty city. I mean, it was a heavily industrialized city. So where did Lin go to find peace and quiet? She went to the cemetery. So just go out this direction along Woodland Avenue and you go to the Woodland Cemetery. And she accounts in this newspaper article just beautifully, like the poetry and the repose and the quiet that she found. She said it was her favorite place to stay in Philadelphia. I can't account for her popularity in China, but to me that it's a very special person to convey a sense of that sort of connection.
Are you confident about your sense of this direction?
Okay. So I will make a confession. My father was an airline captain. So getting your directions right was an imperative in my family. Okay. So when I say it's over there, I'm not wrong.
Okay, thank you. So big thanks for all the speakers and panelists. So we must conclude our symposium, but the event is not ending yet. There will be a reception on the ground floor, so everyone can continue with our conversation. Now I will turn it over to Fritz.
Great. Well, I think I'm double mic'd at the moment, but that's fine. The gates for the Woodland Cemetery were designed by Paul Cray, by the way. So she would have known that connection between that place, which was based on an English landscape garden. So it was a very picturesque tradition that she went to. It's also in my neighborhood and one of my favorite places to visit as well. Poetry and architecture, East and West, more specifically China, the United States, poetry and architecture. Poetry is a very personal art. It's an art that the artist has much control over. And Rossana, I can't help you with the translations, but I'm thinking of what may have been the poetic influences of Lin here at Penn. So it's an unexplored, as part of my job as an educator is to suggest theses for other people to pursue. But at the time she was here, Penn was a hotbed of modernist poetry. My favorite poet, a poet of New Jersey, William Carlos Williams, was here. H.D. was here. And William Carlos Williams, it reminds me, the poem you read reminds me of William Carlos Williams. The simplicity and the directness and the connection. Of course, William Carlos Williams was also a medical doctor, a pediatrician. One of his patients was Robert Smithson. Yeah, so what poetry, I think the sort of a topic for someone to explore is what influence did modern poetry have on Lin and her writings? And architecture. Nancy mentioned the Furness building. Frank Furness designed this. One of the classmates one of the contemporaries of Lin and the other 22 Chinese architects was a little known American architect named Liu Kan. And this was Liu Kan's studio. This was Liu Kan at the time he was teaching at Penn, had the stature he could teach anywhere he wanted. And this is the place he chose to teach. It's a powerful place. It's a place that's memorable. And as you go down the steps to the reception, you'll see that it's a really magnificent place. So thank you for being here to celebrate Lin's legacy with us. I'd like to thank my colleague Zhongjie, Lin, and the Weitzman staff. The development and alumni relations team has been mentioned, but also the communications team. Everything you see, many of our words were generated by Michael Grant and the communications team. So thank you, Michael, et al. So we want to leave you with another video. We started with a video, we'll end with a video produced from some of our friends from Beijing. And after the video, please come downstairs and enjoy a reception with us.